Warhammer 40k has always drawn inspiration from dark fantasy. For its races, its horrors, its depiction of glory, or resilience in the face of the abhorrent. But sometimes that unique flavour of Warhammer 40k has permeated throughout its own influences so much that it becomes easy to lose sight of the original recipe. An original recipe that has had not only the themes of vampirism, but actual vampires at its very core since the very beginning. Like the vampires of our own human mythos, ancient and immortal, the very first publications of Warhammer 40k all those decades ago contained them too. And still, to this day, the setting produces new writings talking about these creatures of the dark. So join me as I go through Warhammer 40k's depictions of vampires and vampirism, from the thematic to the literal. We'll start with those who touch the surface of what it means to be vampire, and end with creatures of the night that won't be denied, 40k's literal vampires. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The vampire Covens of Cassandron are inferred to be an example of how people can end up worshipping the Chaos gods without ever actually knowing that's what they're doing. Mentioned in the Realms of Chaos, The Lost and the Damned, 1990, in conjunction with text about how Chaos worship isn't always done knowingly, it's inferred that the vampire Covens of Cassandron are just normal people, likely entirely unaware of Chaos, whose beliefs and rituals likely worship the blood god entirely by chance, not being outright Chaos cultists. It's less about intent, and more about how easily regular people can get caught up in much bigger and darker things than they understand. And true to their namesake, the notions of being ignorantly swept away into the allure of darkness is a consistent theme, seen across much of vampire media, from Bram Stoker's Dracula to Eggers' Nosferatu. Though sadly, the text also implies that the Inquisition eventually stepped in and expunged them, which likely means they're gone from the setting forever. What's interesting is that though it's not connected intentionally, the later entries in this video could actually shine a light on the true masters of the vampire Covens of Cassandron. The Khrave are one of those forgotten races in Warhammer 40k that when you look at the lore that's out there, definitely have some vampiric qualities, though maybe more in tone than any traditional sense. They're described in Liber Xenologist 2021, a Xeno bestiary written from the perspective of a rogue trader, as big, winged, bat-like armoured humanoid Xenos, clearly leaning on the monstrous vampire visual tropes. The Khrave are ancient. In Lionel Johnson, Lord of the First, 2020, it's said that the Khrave predate even the Eldar. And though in the current setting they wish to enslave others, that same book also tells us that they themselves were enslaved during the Great Crusade by an even more esoteric Xenos, the Auto-Chthonnar. In a fun way, it's a vampire trope within a vampire trope. Parasite beings, thralls, enslaved to the will of other parasite beings, vampires. By the time we hit the 41st millennium though, the Khrave are free of the Auto-Chthonnar, roaming the galaxy as Xeno-pirate mercenaries. Their fall was tectonic. During the Great Crusade, the Khrave were not to be taken lightly. They had titan war machines that could stand toe-to-toe with the Mechanicum's god engines. That said, beyond the wings and ancient menace, there's not a ton of underlying themes directly tying them to traditional or modern vampire myth. They don't need blood, or fierce sunlight at least, not as far as I know. But there's still something there. The 4th edition Warhammer 40k rulebook refers to them as Mind-Eaters, which gives off a very different but still vampiric kind of energy. The Khrave don't drink blood, they feed on consciousness. And that sounds like vampirism to me. The Blood Angels, the Flesh Tearers, the Angels Sanguine, the Blood Drinkers, and so on. All sufferers of the Red Thirst, an inhuman thirsting for blood. This aspect of vampirism is without subtlety. The Red Thirst is one of the two great gene curses that plague the Sons of Sanguinius. The other being the Black Rage, the psychic lash of madness echoing the Great Angel's death. There are few things more quintessential to the vampire myth than the drinking of blood. The Red Thirst is often talked about as this shameful hunger lurking just beneath the surface of these Astartes, noted as being pale-skinned with sharp teeth, vampiric teeth. Denying the vampiric parallels to the Blood Angels is not a done thing. However, it's not just present in the foredoomed biology of the Sons of the Angel, it shapes how some of these chapters act. Take the Angels Vermilion, They've turned blood consumption into a ritual wrapped in this twisted sense of faux necessity. In Devastation of Baal 2017, we see how Dante, chapter master of the Blood Angels himself, openly despises them for it. Every half-century, the Angels Vermilion will take an inordinate excess of their homeworld's mortal population and slaughter them, bloodletting them, creating a veritable lake of blood. The chapter will then pay for this crime by sacrificing one of their own sanguinary priests, after which all Battle Brothers will bathe in and drink up this red ocean until it's gone. The chapter boasts a reduced impact of the Red Thirst and Black Rage, attributing both to this vampiric ritual that I'm sure Count Elizabeth Bathory would approve of. I've always found the tragedy of vampirism to be a big aspect of the portrayal of the mythology, and I think the Angels Vermilion's "we do this not because we want to, but because we need to" approach, despite it very much being a choice that even the flesh tearers abstain from, highlights them as victims of the vampiric seduction consistent throughout vampiric media, like a drug addict's pleasure turned source of sanity. Though one cannot talk about the vampirism of the Blood Angels without talking about Vandoth The Fallen. As per 2019's Necromunda, the Book of Ruin, Vandoth, for the longest time, was thought to be a Goliath, infected with a form of vampirism, and as we'll find out in a moment, vampirism is not something alien to Necromunda. However, in March 2025, Games Workshop all but confirmed Vandoth to be a Blood Angel. Long since abandoned on the Hiveworld, and likely longer still lost to the whims of the Red Thirst, Vandoth roams the Underhive as a killer for hire, with no real discernible motives, save to satiate his blood thirst. When I say all but confirmed, I mean that matter-of-factly. Games Workshop posted the updated model for Vandoth, showing him with not only a Space Marine Phobos pattern bolter, as opposed to the ramshackle Goliath bolters, but also with a Space Marine combat knife, with a blood drop and IX written upon its red sheath. IX. 9th Legion, the Blood Angels. That detail, combined with the vials of blood strapped to his side, basically confirms it. Vandoth is a Blood Angel. You can even see the black carapace access ports all over his body. He was almost certainly stranded on Necromunda hundreds or maybe even thousands of years ago, and slowly gave in to his red thirst. The local Underhivers talk about him like a myth, a blood-drinking giant who haunts the lower levels. Even thought to be an agent of chaos at one point, though those rumors were crushed as Vandoth blasted apart a number of Chaos worshippers in the Underhive, like any good Blood Angel would. Emperor help the Underhive if Vandoth ever falls to the Black Rage. At the moment, he's a hulk of a vampire stalking the night, but should the Black Rage ever take him, it'll take the combined might of the gangs of Necromunda to bring his bloodlust to an end. So yeah, maybe the Blood Angels aren't vampires in a traditional sense, but the themes are all there. Blood, tragedy, loss of control, succumbing to impulse, and massacre rituals soaked in blood. It's all very on-brand for 40k, and it makes one of the most compelling examples of how the setting plays into classic Gothic tropes. Anyway, since we're already on the topic of Necromunda, let's talk about Vampyres. Spelt with a Y, not an I, which is how the old source spells it. So for the sake of clarity and ease of differentiation, and to stop my spell check from having a fit, I'm going to call them Vampyres. I know it's not pronounced that way, but when we get to the next section, you'll appreciate why I'm intentionally butchering it. Everything we know about Vampyres comes from 1999 in Necromunda's Gang War 3. And a lot like a lot of the older Necromunda lore, it's full of really fun, very malleable ideas. Actually, to be fair, new Necromunda lore 2 isn't often tied down by 40k's general rigidity. We literally just got finished discussing the Necromunda Blood Angel sewer-dwelling boogeyman from 2025 lore. The Vampyres aren't just vampire-flavoured mutants. They tick a surprising number of boxes from more modern vampire fiction, like the Underworld series or Karl Urban's character from 2011's Priest. They're very much in that gritty, post-industrial vampire niche, where the line between a vampire and person with superpowers is very blurry. Vampires are blood drinkers, for starters. Blood is their sustenance. They're nocturnal, and they've got supernatural durability, to the point where they don't feel the need to wear armor. Probably because they've got Wolverine-style regeneration, like actual coming back from death levels of healing. And if you're wondering, how do I kill a vampire? You gotta take their head. I'd say that's consistent with vampire media, but it's pretty consistent with most everything fact or fiction. The problem, of course, is getting close enough to actually take it. Vampires don't operate alone. Each one has their own horde of serfs, little underhive cults of loyal thralls. There's a whole ranking system too. Thralls, senior thralls, acolytes, master acolytes. The vampires themselves come in ranks. Regular vampire, vampire lord, vampire master. It's a very hierarchical setup. And like a lot of vampire stories, the more blood they drink, and the longer they live, the stronger they get. A fun little detail: when it comes to draining the life of others, vampires are uniquely picky. Necromunda is filled with the drug-addled, abhumans, mutants, and all sorts of human filth. Vampires like their blood pure, so it's the job of their underlings to provide them with food-grade victims. One detail that I really like is that they're invisible to artificial sight. Bionic eyes specifically are quoted, but I imagine it's the works too, Auspex gear, all of it. It's a neat little sci-fi twist on the old vampires don't show up in mirrors thing, and it fits Necromunda perfectly, where half the population relies on cybernetic vision just to see through toxic smog. As far as we know, they haven't made it off Necromunda, but there's nothing to say they're not already out there. The Inquisition is aware of them. They know these things are buried deep in the lower levels of the Hive. But for reasons unexplained, the Inquisition settled on containment, not extermination. They've got systems in place to stop vampires from leaving the Hive and spreading elsewhere. And according to the same Gang War 3 source, the Inquisition thinks vampires are connected to chaos in some way. But to be fair, the Inquisition slaps the chaos label on just about anything it doesn't like. The actual lore suggests that vampires are a mostly stable mutation of ancient human stock, which is fun because vampires seem way more stable than most abhumans. And if their need to drink blood could be satiated on a wider scale, vampires would make an utterly devastating tool in humanity's arsenal. Though the Emperor is far more likely to walk once more than the Imperium is to move beyond its prejudices. Okay, so I have nothing to back up this theory. But, the Inquisition thinks vampires are connected to chaos, so why wouldn't they just go in and kill them? The Inquisition has done worse for less. And why is it that the vampires are clearly super survivable, but are only on Necromunda? My theory is that vampires are out in the galaxy, operating within the Imperium, even within the Inquisition, especially within the Inquisition. They're relegated to Necromunda is just code for don't look too hard for them elsewhere. It would also explain why the Necromunda vamps get a free pass, as any Inquisitor who questions why they're not getting killed just gets some vampire High Lord Inquisitor jargon about how it's a waste of time and resources, or just not possible. But yeah, I have nothing to back this up. It just makes sense to me personally. Vampires are a cool piece of lore that feels very self-contained, but packed with possibilities. The blend of modern vampire tropes with 40k's grime and paranoia makes them feel right at home in Necromunda. Alright, it's time for actual vampires in 40k. Not just the metaphorical ones like the Blood Angels, or the Underhive horrors of Necromunda, but instead, a type of vampire that not only touches every single vampire trope, but are actually called vampires, with the correct English spelling this time. Vampires are born of the warp. They're not strictly demons. They're like the enslavers. The warp is their point of origin, but they have no loyalty to any chaos god or chaos undivided. They are their own malicious entities. Meaning, much like the enslavers, I would posit that their vampiric origins are likely during or before the War in Heaven. And they're close to what you'd find in modern vampire fiction, or in something like the Elder Scrolls. They take the form of politically important individuals, governors, nobles, military leaders, using psychic powers, hypnosis, and raw charisma to build up cults of thralls around them. It's not usually violent either. Like with a lot of vampire stories, they don't just seize power, they talk their way into it. Seduction, manipulation, classic vampire stuff. We know from Rogue Trader 1987 that they can also take on a terrifying true form when pushed. Something huge and a creature closer in appearance to the Khrave than to the mortals they masquerade as. The most consistent vampire trope, the monster in the mask, taking which form best suits the individual's villainy at each moment. What sets these vampires apart from more traditional ones isn't just the sci-fi twist of, they're across the galaxy. It's that they don't limit themselves to human societies. They can shapeshift to mimic other sentient species, meaning they can infiltrate Xenos cultures too. There's no proof that they've gotten into places like the Tau Empire, but it is possible, and it's very likely. Speaking of which, these vampires don't necessarily feed on blood. At least, they didn't originally. The Rogue Trader book says they survive by draining life force, and that they adjust their physiology to fit whatever society they're blending into. But this got a bit of a soft update in the Eisenbruck Horror, 2021, where we see an Imperial governor, a vampire, slowly taking control of a planet while feeding on the blood of its people. So it looks like the idea of blood drinking has been folded back into their lore. The same vampire is also referenced in Warhammer Siege, 1988, where he survives an assassination attempt from an Imperial assassin before fully rising to power on his world. Vampires aren't just villainous schemers, they're hyper-lethal combatants. This follows what we see in the Black Templars 4th edition codex, where a younger Helbrecht earns his place in the Sword Brethren by slaying a vampire who'd taken over a planet in a very similar fashion. The implication? A vampire is powerful enough to be a threat to space marines. This specific kind of vampire, manipulator, shapeshifter, psychic predator, has so much untapped potential. You've got the traditional horror and mythology, sure, but mix that with the unique brutality and political paranoia of 40k, and you've got a storytelling goldmine. At the start of the video, we mentioned the vampire covens of Cassandron, and it made me wonder, were the vampire covens really just misguided blood cults? Or were they pawns of something much older, smarter, and hungrier? Perhaps an unnamed vampire. So all of the Astartes Anonymous guys know that I love vampire media, especially Castlevania. I remember falling in love with Symphony of the Night so long ago. Even recently I've caught myself enjoying games like V Rising. It really saddened me that fantasy had this monopoly on Warhammer vampirism, until I realized it didn't. 40k has space marine vampires, vampires who live underground and form cults, vampires who parade as nobility, ruling worlds from the shadows, drinking the blood of the innocents, ancient vampiric Xenos who at the height of their power could stand toe-to-toe with a space marine legion. I love that Necromunda's Vampyres and Rogue Trader / Eisenbrack Horror's vampires have implications that could affect the Imperium and the galaxy on a much wider scale, and in true vampire fashion, they could very well be contenders on that galactic scale, operating in shadows unbeknownst to all. Let me know in the comments what kind of stories or events you think vampires might have had a hand in. See you next time. Oh yeah, Moots told me that I had to tell you that the chapter master for the Blood Drinkers chapter is called Orlok. Like Count Orlok. Thank you, Moots. I can't believe I forgot to mention the vampire squig. This piece of right here is a vampire squig. This is the only known official image of the vampire squig. It is equal parts adorable and stupid looking. They're used as pets by orc pain boys to suck out poisoned or otherwise up blood from injured orcs. If it's not wartime and there's nothing for an orc to kill, pain boys will literally kidnap perfectly healthy orcs to feed them to their vampire squigs to keep them from getting hungry. Alright, that's it. We're done. Behind every paragraph and reference in these videos, there's a mountain of research, editing, and more than a few burnt-out cogitators. That's where our patrons come in, with multiple tiers offering a variety of things, from exclusive chats in our Discord to personalized artwork created for our individual patrons. Every subscription keeps the machine spirit of the Astartes Anonymous YouTube channel appeased. And for our top-tier patrons, a display on the Wall of Honor at the end of each podcast. So if you're enjoying the content, please do consider taking a quick look at our Patreon. Thanks so much for watching.